that man, officer! He is a trespasser! Arrest him! Tim! I am the HOA president. I am responsible. He is a danger. This is ridiculous! I am the one who called the police!
There he is, officer. That is the man who broke into my house. The scream split through the quiet afternoon like glass. Red and blue lights flashed across my front porch, and the woman pointing at me stood there in my silk robe, shaking like she had caught a burglar. The officers froze. I did not move. My suitcase was still in my hand, the wheels leaving a faint track on the concrete driveway. My name is Frank, cybersecurity consultant, traveler, logical thinker, but that day logic had no place in what I was seeing, because the woman calling the cops on me was living in my house. I stared up at her, Barbara Clean, HOA president, neighborhood tyrant, and apparently new occupant of my home. She had just ordered the police to arrest me on my own property, and the wildest part? This was not an accident. My return from Tokyo 2 weeks early was not random. I had been watching her from 5,800 miles away. The phone in my hand was not just for photos. It was a remote access hub to the most advanced digital surveillance trap she had ever walked into. Stick with me, because by the end of this, Barbara was not just embarrassed, she was in handcuffs. 6 months earlier, I had bought what I thought was my dream home: glass, steel, minimalist perfection. A fortress of silence tucked inside an oak-lined community that prided itself on perfection, the kind of place where lawns were measured with rulers and gossip spread faster than fertilizer. After years of grinding in cramped city apartments, I had earned this peace, but peace in suburbia comes with a price tag, and that price tag had a name: Barbara. My first week there, she appeared like a human fine print, clipboard, fake smile, and a personality that could strip paint. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her eyes already scanning my property for violations. Her target? My black steel mailbox. "Not compliant," she chirped. Apparently, the approved model was a hideous green colonial box that looked like it belonged in 1973. The fine? $50 a day. I laughed until I realized she was not joking. I caved, replaced it, and in that moment I made the worst mistake possible. I taught her I could be pushed. The next months were suburban warfare by paperwork, a letter for my trash cans being visible too long, a fine because a Japanese maple was not on the approved flora list, a warning because a package sat on my porch for 3 hours. It was like living next to a dictatorship wrapped in pastel colors. My neighbor Arthur, a retired engineer, leaned over the fence one day, shaking his head. "You are getting the Barbara treatment," he said. "She has been running this place like her own little kingdom for 10 years. He grinned. She fined a family once because their grandkid's birthday had too many balloons. I laughed, but deep down, I knew this was not funny. It was control. When I got the offer to lead a cybersecurity project in Tokyo, I thought it would be a month of peace away from her. I sent the required notice to the HOA, my trip dates, my emergency contacts. Barbara, as the HOA president, had access to a master key, a ridiculous rule for emergencies. I activated my custom home system, a network of smart sensors, cameras, biometric locks, and internal trackers. I called it the Ghost. It did not just protect, it watched. Every door, every fridge, every thermostat, logged. I left for Tokyo, confident that even if a mouse sneezed, I would know. 2 weeks in, the data started acting strange. My bedroom thermostat had been adjusted from 65 degrees Fahrenheit to 72. My fridge logs showed new items: milk, cheap Chardonnay, and some store-brand yogurt I would never buy. Then came the real kicker. My media server showed a 3-hour binge of The Real Housewives. I froze. My blood went cold. I do not drink cheap wine, and I sure as hell do not watch reality TV. I opened the internal camera feed. There they were, Barbara and her husband Gary, living in my house. They were lounging on my couch, feet on my ottoman, watching my 85-inch TV. Barbara wore one of my cashmere throws. Gary scrolled through channels with my remote. They were not robbing me. They had moved in. At first, rage took over. I wanted to call the police immediately, but then my professional brain kicked in. Barbara was powerful in this neighborhood, and manipulative. She could claim it was an inspection or some HOA nonsense. My word versus hers? That was a losing game. So I did what I do best. I gathered data. For a week straight, I became a digital ghost inside my own home. I downloaded every second of footage. I tracked fridge usage, coffee machine consumption, even smart toilet logs. I built a timeline so detailed it could stand up in court, and then I found it. Barbara bragging on the phone to a friend. The owner is some rich tech nerd in Asia. We just have to be out by the 31st, and he will never know we were here. That was the moment I stopped being angry and started building the perfect trap. My lawyer, David Chen, nearly choked when I sent him the first audio clip. "Frank, this is gold," he said. "We are going to bury her, legally." We crafted a two-part plan, criminal complaint and civil destruction of her HOA empire. But the pièce de résistance? My return date. The HOA believed I would be gone until June 1st. David and I changed that. I would be home May 15th. We called it Operation Homecoming. We would catch her mid-crime, living in my house, using my things, lying through her teeth. And we would do it in front of witnesses. "Let her call the cops," David said, smirking. "Her own arrogance will do the rest." The day I flew home felt eternal. Every second on that plane buzzed with tension. When I finally landed, I did not take my usual driver. Too visible. I grabbed a cab, had it drop me 2 blocks away. Barbara's Mercedes was parked neatly in her driveway, which meant she was not there. Perfect. I rolled my suitcase up the street. The neighborhood looked peaceful, sprinklers ticking, kids playing, the calm before a storm. And then I saw her. Barbara, sitting on my porch in my late wife's silk kimono, sipping wine like suburban royalty. For a second, she did not see me. Then her head lifted, confusion, recognition, and panic flashing across her face like lightning. But in seconds, that fear hardened into arrogance. She stood, squared her shoulders, and sneered. "Who are you?" "This is private property." I set my suitcase down slowly. "Hello, Barbara," I said evenly. "I live here." She blinked, then went red. "That is impossible. The owner is in Tokyo." Her voice was shrill, desperate. "You are trespassing. I am calling the police." Perfect. I did not stop her. I even smiled. Within minutes, the sound of sirens echoed through the cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked out their windows. Arthur appeared on his lawn, arms folded. 2 patrol cars pulled in. "Ma'am? Sir? What is going on here?" the older officer asked. Barbara did not hesitate. "That man broke into my house." "Arrest him," she shrieked. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, voice trembling, fake tears glistening. The young cop reached for his holster. "Sir, hands where I can see them." Of course, I said, "Calm. This is my home." The officers looked uncertain. "ID, please." I handed over my driver's license. The older cop, Sergeant Miller, read the address out loud. 1120 Cypress Lane. His eyes flicked between the card and the front door. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this address matches his license." Barbara's mask cracked. "It is fake," she snapped. "He forged it. I am the HOA president. I know who lives here." "Officer," I said quietly, "if you will allow me." I stepped up to the door, pressed my thumb on the biometric scanner. The deadbolt clicked open. Silence. The kind of silence that ends wars. Just then, a black sedan rolled up. David Chen stepped out, briefcase in hand. "Good afternoon, officers," he said. "I represent Mr. Franklin, the legal homeowner." He turned to Barbara. "Mrs. Clean, I would advise you to remain silent." Then he played the recording. Barbara's voice filled the air, clear, confident, damning. "We just have to clean up before he gets back on the first." The look on her face was priceless. shock melting into horror. And then the front door creaked open. Gary stepped out, pale and shaking. "I told her this was a bad idea," he blurted. "She made me do it. That was it." Sergeant Miller sighed, pulled out his cuffs. "Barbara Clean, you are under arrest." The neighbors watched in stunned silence as Barbara was led away. Arthur raised a glass from his porch, a silent toast. The queen of the HOA had fallen. Her empire of fines and fake authority collapsed overnight. The HOA dissolved. Barbara lost her house, her car, and her reputation. And me? I donated her restitution check to a homeless charity. It felt poetic. Weeks later, the ugly green mailbox she had forced on me was gone, replaced by the sleek black steel one I had loved. I sat on my back patio, the same one she had used for her fake dinner parties, sipping the same scotch she had bragged about. The sunset glowed across my glass walls. I thought about Barbara, about arrogance, control, and how power built on pettiness always crumbles. She thought I was just a quiet tech guy, easy to push, easy to manipulate. But she forgot one thing. I do not lose battles. I analyze them. So here's the takeaway, friends. Bullies thrive when you stay quiet. But when you fight back with facts, with patience, with data, they burn themselves down. And sometimes justice does not knock. It logs in. The shrill pitch of Barbara's voice carried down the cul-de-sac like a siren of false righteousness. "There he is, officer. That is the man who broke into my house." Her act was worthy of an award. Trembling hands, wide eyes, pure suburban panic. But the truth was, standing calmly at the bottom of the steps, suitcase in one hand, phone in the other, me, the owner, the supposed intruder. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. Red and blue lights flickered against my windows, washing the pristine white walls of my home in chaos. I could see the reflection of the officers stepping out of their patrol cars, scanning the scene. My neighbor Arthur was already on his porch, coffee mug in hand, looking like a man watching the season finale of his favorite show. And really, he was. He had warned me about Barbara. He just did not realize how right he had been. The first officer was young, built like a linebacker, adrenaline in every step. The second, older and slower, exuded the kind of patience that comes from decades of dealing with human stupidity. "All right," the older one said, calm and practiced. "What is happening here?" Barbara pounced on the question like a predator. "This man broke into my home. He is dangerous. I am the HOA president. I manage this property." Her words tumbled over each other, the hysteria perfectly rehearsed. I stood motionless, the very image of calm. "Officers," I said, my voice even. "This is my home. My name is Franklin. I just returned from an international trip." The younger cop, Officer Reed, tensed. "I need to see some ID, sir." I nodded. "Of course. May I reach into my jacket?" Permission granted. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out my wallet and handed over my driver's license. The air was thick, tense, alive. Sergeant Miller, that was the older cop, studied the card for a long moment. His eyes flicked from the photo to my face, then down to the address, 1120 Cypress Lane. His brow furrowed. He turned the license toward the younger officer. "This address? Match?" Reed looked up, uncertain. "Yeah, Sarge. It matches the report." Barbara's lips thinned. "That does not prove anything," she barked. "He could have forged it. He is some kind of hacker, I am sure of it." That made me smile. "Ma'am," I said softly, "you might want to stop talking before you add perjury to your list." Her head snapped toward me like I had slapped her. "Excuse me? You do not talk to me that way. I am the president of this community." The title dripped off her tongue like it meant something divine, but Sergeant Miller was not impressed. "Ma'am, I am going to ask you to step back while we verify the situation." Her eyes flashed fury, but she obeyed, barely. I turned toward the door, still filming everything discreetly on my phone. "Officers," I said, I can prove ownership conclusively. Go ahead, Miller said, but slowly. I walked past Barbara, my suitcase wheels rumbling softly over the stone path. The air felt electric. I pressed my thumb against the biometric lock beside the door. A soft chime, a click, and the heavy door swung open. The silence that followed was total. Barbara's expression collapsed, confusion, disbelief, then naked horror. The officers just stared. That, I said, is my proof. Barbara's voice cracked. That does not mean anything. She was grasping at straws, desperation dripping from every word. Mom, Miller said quietly, biometric locks do not fake fingerprints. I looked her dead in the eye. Would you like to see the footage from when you moved in, Barbara? Right on cue, a sleek black sedan turned into the driveway. David Chen stepped out, calm and unshakable as ever, a briefcase in hand. He walked straight toward us, flashing his credentials. Good afternoon, officers, he said. I am David Chen, legal counsel for Mr. Franklin. Barbara's face twisted in confusion. Wait, this is ridiculous. I am the one who called the police. David raised an eyebrow. Yes. On the homeowner. He tapped his tablet, opening a video file. For your record, Sergeant, he said, turning the screen toward him. Barbara's own voice filled the air, smug, self-satisfied, undeniable. He will not come back early. I have his itinerary. We just have to be out by the 31st. Clean up and he will never even know we were here. Barbara froze. The color drained from her face. Her husband Gary appeared at the door, pale and sweating. I told her it was a bad idea, he said weakly. She made me do it. The officers exchanged glances. Sergeant Miller sighed, the sound of a man realizing how ridiculous his day had become. Mrs. Clean, he said, his tone now official, you are under arrest for criminal trespass and burglary. The click of handcuffs echoed like music. The neighborhood was dead silent, broken only by the chirping of sprinklers and the faint whimpering from Barbara. Her reign of terror was over. She did not go quietly. Of course, she never did. This is a mistake, she shouted as they led her to the car. You will regret this. Her words rang hollow against the flashing lights. I simply watched, calm, composed, holding my phone like a mirror, reflecting her downfall. Arthur lifted his mug in a silent toast from his porch. About time, he called out. I gave him a nod. You have no idea. That night, the news spread faster than wildfire. Every chat group in the HOA lit up. Screenshots, video clips, rumors. Within hours, the so-called queen of the HOA was trending in the local community app. The same people she had fined for minor infractions were now laughing over videos of her being cuffed in her silk kimono. It was poetic justice, and I slept like a rock for the first time in months. But Barbara's story was not done yet. Her lawyer tried everything. Excuses, fake emergencies, claims of mental strain. Nothing worked. The data did not lie. The timestamps, the security logs, the recordings, all airtight. She eventually pled guilty to felony trespass and theft, earning probation, a hefty fine, and mandatory counseling. Gary, ever the cowardly sidekick, cooperated fully. He was not charged. I even told the prosecutor to let him go. His public humiliation was punishment enough. I saw him one afternoon, weeks later, loading boxes into a moving van. He would not even look at me. She ruined everything, he muttered. I did not respond. I did not need to. The sight of him driving away was closure enough. David and I attended the emergency HOA board meeting soon after. The board members, the same sycophants who had once enabled Barbara, looked like cornered animals. Mr. Franklin, one of them began nervously, we deeply regret what has happened. It was an isolated incident. I smiled politely. An isolated incident, I said, made possible by a rule that gives one person access to every home in this community. The room went still. This is bigger than one corrupt president, I continued. It is a systemic failure. You gave a woman like Barbara keys to everyone's private life. That ends today. I pulled up a still frame from my security footage, Barbara hosting a dinner party on my patio. Gasps rippled through the room. David stood beside me, hands clasped. "My client could sue this HOA into financial ruin," he said evenly, "but he prefers reform to revenge." A motion was made to abolish the emergency key bylaw. It passed unanimously. Then, as if purging their collective guilt, every single board member resigned. The community nominated new leadership. Arthur was elected president with a standing ovation. "Congratulations," I told him. He grinned. "I will try to keep the balloon police in check." Weeks later, the air in the neighborhood felt lighter. People waved more. The gossip was friendlier. My black steel mailbox gleamed under the afternoon sun, a small but powerful monument to victory. The ugly green one Barbara forced me to install? I smashed it myself and left it at the curb, compliance notice attached. One evening, I sat on my patio, the same place Barbara once claimed as her own. The cicadas hummed. A gentle breeze brushed the glass walls. I poured a glass of my single malt, the same bottle she had flaunted to her friends, and watched the sunset stretch across the sky. The house was silent again. My sanctuary was restored. I thought about Eleanor, my wife. The memory of Barbara parading around in her clothes had once filled me with rage. Now it just reminded me of what I had protected. Not just a house, but a memory, a legacy of peace I refused to let arrogance destroy. Barbara never understood that. She thought luxury was something you could steal. But peace? Peace is earned. Sometimes justice is not loud or violent. It is quiet, surgical, precise. It is the sound of a digital lock clicking open, of a camera recording truth, of handcuffs closing around someone who thought they were untouchable. The local paper ran the story under the headline, "HOA President Charged in Bizarre Home Invasion Scandal." They quoted me, briefly, "Privacy is not a privilege, it is a right." That line went viral. I started receiving messages from other homeowners across the country, people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Turns out, my experience was not unique. It was just the first one that got caught in 4K. David called a week later. "You have become something of a folk hero," he said, chuckling. "Maybe start a consulting branch, Neighborhood Justice Solutions." I laughed. "No thanks. I have had enough HOA politics for a lifetime." But in truth, I had learned something invaluable. Bullies, whether they sit behind HOA bylaws or corporate desks, thrive on two things: fear and silence. They assume you will look away, that you will let it slide, that you will not fight back because it is inconvenient. Barbara built her empire on that assumption. And when someone finally stood up, not with noise, but with evidence, she folded. So here is my message to anyone listening: never underestimate quiet people. We are the ones watching, documenting, waiting. We do not fight with noise, we fight with proof. When the night finally settled, I finished my drink and looked around the property, spotless, serene, alive again. My home had survived an invasion not of thieves, but of arrogance. And in the end, technology did not just protect my house, it revealed the truth. Barbara's downfall was not an accident. It was mathematics. It was logic. It was justice, written in data. So next time someone underestimates you, remember this story. Because sometimes the best revenge is evidence. Within minutes, the serene afternoon was torn apart by the wail of sirens. 2 police cruisers screamed around the corner and pulled into my driveway, lights flashing, bathing the scene in strobes of red and blue. Arthur appeared on his lawn next door, exactly as I had hoped, watching with a concerned but knowing expression. 2 officers got out, a younger, eager-looking cop I later learned was Officer Reed, and an older, more seasoned sergeant with a calm, weathered face named Miller. They took positions, their hands near their holsters, assessing the scene. "Ma'am, sir, what is going on here?" Sergeant Miller asked, his voice a calm beacon in Barbara's storm of hysterics. Barbara pointed a trembling finger at me. "That man, officer, he is a trespasser. He came onto my property and refused to leave. I think he was trying to rob me. Arrest him." The younger Officer Reed took a step toward me, his hand on his weapon. Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them. I slowly raised my hands, my phone still clutched in one of them. Officers, I said, my voice steady and low, a stark contrast to Barbara's screeching. There seems to be a grave misunderstanding. This is my house. Barbara let out a derisive snort. He is lying. I am the HOA president. I am responsible for this property while the owner is out of the country. This man is a danger to the community. This was her playing her trump card, her title, the flimsy shield of authority she hid behind. It was exactly what I wanted. She had publicly, in front of law enforcement, declared herself the responsible party for the property. She had woven her own net, and now it was time for me to pull it tight. Sergeant Miller held up a hand to quiet Barbara, his expression one of professional patience. His eyes, honed by years on the force, scanned from her frantic, overdramatic posture to my calm, stationary one. It was clear he was assessing credibility, and Barbara's screeching performance was not helping her case. Okay, let us all just take a breath, he said, his gaze settling on me. Sir, can you provide me with some identification? Of course, officer, I replied. It is in the inside pocket of my jacket. May I have your permission to slowly reach for it? He nodded. I deliberately and methodically retrieved my wallet, extracted my driver's license, and handed it to him. He examined it, his eyes flicking from the photo to my face, then down to the address printed below my name. 1120 Cypress Lane. This was the first domino. A small, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his posture. He looked over at Barbara. Ma'am, the address on his license matches this house. Barbara, cornered by a simple fact, became even more frantic. So what? That proves nothing. He could have found it, stolen it. People forge documents all the time. I am telling you, as the president of this homeowners association, this man is not the owner. She was staking her entire identity on her title, believing it granted her an unimpeachable authority that superseded actual evidence. It was a pathetic, desperate gamble. Officers, I said, breaking the tense silence, I can definitively prove my ownership in about 3 seconds if you will allow me to approach my front door. Sergeant Miller exchanged a quick glance with Officer Reed, then nodded again. Go ahead. Slowly, I walked past Barbara, who watched me with a look of pure venom, and up the 3 steps to my front door. The door was equipped with a state-of-the-art biometric lock. I placed my right thumb on the small glowing glass panel. There was a soft electronic chime, a click of the deadbolt retracting, and the heavy door swung open an inch. The silence that followed was deafening. The visual was irrefutable. You cannot forge a fingerprint on the spot. I turned back to the officers. Barbara was frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. She looked like a statue commemorating the exact moment of a colossal miscalculation. I let the moment hang in the air for a few seconds before continuing. Furthermore, I said, my voice resonating with cold clarity, while I can certainly prove who I am, I also have incontrovertible evidence of who has been illegally residing in my home, consuming my property, and using my belongings for the past 17 days. As if on cue, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. David Chen got out, looking sharp and composed in a dark suit. He carried a leather briefcase and walked toward us with an air of purpose. The arrival of a lawyer dramatically changed the temperature of the entire encounter. Sergeant Miller, David said, extending a hand, which the sergeant shook. My name is David Chen. I am Mr. Franklin's legal counsel. He then turned his head slightly to acknowledge Barbara. Officers, my client is the sole legal owner of this property. He has just returned from an international business trip which was supposed to conclude on June 1st. David paused, letting that sink in. We have reason to believe that this woman, Mrs. Clean, has been using his absence to illegally occupy his residence. We are not talking about a simple misunderstanding or a brief wellness check. We are talking about a full-on 2.5-week stay, Barbara sputtered, finding her voice again. That is a lie. I was performing daily inspections. There were reports of a plumbing issue. It was a weak, flimsy excuse, and it evaporated in the face of David's next statement. Daily inspections that involved sleeping in my client's bed, wearing his late wife's clothing, drinking his liquor, and hosting dinner parties? David asked, his voice laced with ice. He opened his briefcase. We have an extensive time-stamped digital record of Mrs. Clennis' entire stay, including hours of high-definition video and audio recordings from the home security system. Recordings which prove, in her own words, her intent to vacate the premises just before my client's scheduled return to avoid detection. David pulled out a tablet. With a few taps, he was ready. To save everyone time, he said, turning the screen toward the officers. Let us start with this. He pressed play. It was the audio clip I had labeled Exhibit A. Barbara's smug, dismissive voice filled the air perfectly clear. We just have to make sure we are completely out of here by the morning of the 31st. Clean everything up and he will never even know we were here. The officers' faces, which had been professionally neutral, now hardened. They looked from the tablet to Barbara, whose face had crumbled. All the bluster, all the arrogance had drained away, leaving behind a sallow, terrified woman. She was speechless. And just when it seemed it could not get any worse for her, the front door I had unlocked creaked open further. Her husband Gary peered out, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He saw the police, the lawyer, and my stony expression. He cracked instantly. "I am so sorry," he blurted out, rushing onto the porch. I told her it was a terrible idea. I did not want any part of this. She made me do it. His pathetic, panicked confession was the final nail in her coffin. Sergeant Miller had heard enough. He took a deliberate step toward Barbara, his demeanor now entirely that of a law enforcement officer about to make an arrest. The shift was absolute. There was no more negotiation, no more de-escalation. Barbara Klein, he said, his voice flat and official. You have the right to remain silent. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed in the sudden quiet of the afternoon. As Officer Reed led a whimpering, utterly defeated Barbara toward the back of a patrol car, my neighbor Arthur, who had been watching the entire drama unfold from his lawn, caught my eye. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod of approval, a gesture that conveyed more satisfaction than 1,000 words. The Queen had been deposed, not in some stuffy boardroom, but in a humiliating public spectacle on the steps of the very palace she had tried to steal. The aftermath of Barbara's arrest was swift and decisive, with her cuffed and driven away in the back of a squad car. A satisfying silence descended upon the neighborhood, broken only by the whispers of the few neighbors who had witnessed the downfall. Gary, her husband, was questioned, but ultimately not charged, largely due to his immediate cooperation and my assertion that he was more of a coerced accomplice than a co-conspirator. David and I saw no value in prosecuting him. His public humiliation and the implosion of his marriage were punishment enough. He scurried back to their actual house with the haste of a frightened mouse, leaving me to finally truly come home. The legal process for Barbara was an open and shut case. Faced with the mountain of digital evidence I had compiled, the hours of video, the server logs, the damning audio of her admitting her plan, her lawyer advised her to plead guilty to a lesser felony charge of criminal trespass and theft. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation, a significant fine, mandatory counseling, and most importantly, was ordered to pay full restitution for all damages and consumed goods. I meticulously calculated the cost of the food she ate, the wine she drank, and the premium scotch she served to her friends down to the last coffee bean. David presented the itemized bill to her attorney, a document that itself served as a final humiliating reminder of her grubby intrusion. I later learned from Arthur that she and Gary were forced to sell their house to cover her legal fees and the restitution. The last I saw of them, they were loading a U-Haul, their faces grim. As for the restitution check, when it arrived, I endorsed it directly over to a local charity that provides housing for the homeless. It seemed the most fitting end for money obtained from such a gross abuse of shelter. But my victory was not just about personal justice against one woman. It was about dismantling the toxic system she had created. The HOA board was thrown into absolute chaos. With their president facing a felony charge, an emergency meeting was called in the community clubhouse. I attended with David by my side. The remaining board members, a collection of spineless enablers who had allowed Barbara's reign of terror to persist for years, sat at a long table looking distinctly uncomfortable. They were expecting me to sue the HOA into oblivion. I had a different goal. David began by laying out the sheer scope of Barbara's abuse of power, focusing on the emergency key bylaw that had been her weapon of choice. He explained that while we had every right to pursue a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the HOA for gross negligence, my client was prepared to be reasonable under certain conditions. I then stood up and addressed the packed room of my fellow homeowners. I told them the whole story, not with anger, but with a calm, factual demeanor. I projected a few key pieces of evidence onto a large screen, a still from the video of Barbara hosting a party on my patio, and the transcript of her phone call bragging about her free vacation. Gasps rippled through the room. People who had been fined for the color of their petunias were now seeing the enforcer of those rules revealed as a common thief. This is not about me, I concluded. This is about the principle that no one in our community should have the power to violate the sanctity of another's home. This bylaw giving one person access to all of our houses is a security nightmare waiting to happen. It has to go. The enablers on the board folded like cheap suits. A motion was immediately raised from the floor to permanently rescind the emergency key bylaw. It passed unanimously. In the ensuing fallout, the entire board was shamed into resigning. An election for a new board was announced. Several people nominated me, but I politely declined. I was not a politician. I was a problem solver who had already solved his problem. I did, however, nominate Arthur. The retired professor, initially hesitant, was goaded into accepting by a standing ovation from his neighbors. He went on to lead a new, far more reasonable and transparent HOA, one focused on maintaining the community, not policing it. Weeks later, life had settled into a new, more peaceful normal. The ugly green mailbox Barbara had forced upon me was gone, replaced once again by my sleek black steel one. It felt like a small but significant symbol of my victory. I was sitting on my back patio one evening, the same patio where Barbara had entertained her friends with my scotch. I poured myself a glass of that very same single malt, the bottle now rightfully mine to enjoy. The air was calm, the sun was setting, and the only sounds were the crickets and the distant laughter of children. I thought about the absurdity of it all. Barbara's obsessive desire for a life of luxury she could not afford, a life she saw embodied in my home, drove her to commit a crime that ultimately cost her the comfortable life she already had. Her arrogance and her belief in her own petty authority were her downfall. She underestimated me completely. She saw a quiet tech nerd, not a man whose entire career was built on seeing patterns, gathering data, and patiently waiting for the right moment to act. She thought she was a wolf, sneaking into the sheep pen, never realizing the sheepdog was watching from halfway around the world, logging her every move. The whole crazy ordeal reinforced a lesson I had learned long ago in the digital world. Bullies, whether they are in a boardroom or a subdivision, thrive on intimidation and the assumption that you will not fight back. But when you do, when you stand up with facts, with evidence, and with resolve, their power evaporates like morning mist. They are often, at their core, nothing more than a facade. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. It is proof that sometimes the best security system is a little bit of patience and a whole lot of data.